All right, it looks like we're at 2 o'clock. It looks like a lot of the principals that need to be here are here. So let's get started. I'll just go over these ground rules real quick. Hello, everybody. My name is Herb Smart. I'm a member of the Technical Advisory Committee for the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. Welcome to our regular meeting for May 27th. We'll go through the agenda in a second, but until then, just a reminder to mute and unmute appropriately, and to don't put the call on hold, please. If you wish to comment on matters listed on the agenda, there will be time for each of the agenda items for that. And if you wish to comment on items not listed on the agenda, we'll have a public participation item in a minute, and you can raise your hand or unmute or speak at that time. Note that there's a raise hand feature in Zoom in the reactions tab, or you could press *9 on your phone. There's lots of ways to do that. We'll make sure we get your comments taken down. We're recording the meeting, and meeting materials are available online at turlockgroundwater.org. I'm running a little bit behind in putting those up today, so as the presenters are presenting, I will get them online before the meeting has concluded. With that being said, I'll hand it on over. Feel free and run your meeting, chairs.
Thank you, Walt. Sorry, Walt. I just saw Walt's picture. Thank you, Herb. This is Michael Cook from Turlock Irrigation District, chair of the West Turlock Subbasin Technical Advisory Committee. So I'm calling this meeting to order at 2:03. It looks like we have a quorum from the West Turlock Technical Advisory Committee. So I'm just going to go through some names and agencies. Let me know if I miss anybody. I see Walt from San Luis County, Karen from Ceres, David from Denair, Lacey and Brody from Merced County, Mike Pidcock representing Waterford and Hickman, Debbie and others representing TID, Leandro from Delhi, and Miguel representing Modesto. If I missed anybody from the West Turlock Subbasin. Okay, with that, we have a quorum. What about the East Turlock Subbasin? Do you guys have a quorum? And who's going to chair today? Is Kevin on? I don't see Kevin. I don't know if Matt or Walt want to take the gavel for the East Turlock Subbasin.
Yeah, I'm looking to see who else is here. Usually, Dennis, are you out there? No. Matt?
Yep, I'm here.
Or what about Brady or Lacey?
They're both on, I think.
Okay. Well, we've got a quorum then between Stanislaus County, Merced County, and the MID. We don't have Belico Cortez represented or Eastside Water District.
Okay, sounds good, Walt. So I've done the call to order. So moving to item number 3, approval of minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes up for approval. The regular meeting of April 22nd, the special meeting of April 29th, and the special meeting of May 13th. So I believe we can take all 3 of those at the same time. So with the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, anybody want to make a motion to adopt 1 or all 3 of those sets of minutes?
I'll motion.
Okay, thank you, Leandro. Is that all 3, Leandro?
All 3, yes.
Yeah, okay, so Leandro from Delhi motions. Do we have a second?
Karen from Ceres will second.
Okay, so Karen from Ceres is seconded. Although, any other questions before we proceed with the vote? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, with that motion, the West Turlock Technical Advisory Committee has adopted those meeting minutes from April 22nd, 29th, and May 13th. So handing back to you, Walt, the adoption of the minutes.
Yeah, we'll consider the same action for the East Turlock Subbasin TAC. Approval of the minutes, April 22nd, 2021, April 29th, 2021, May 13th, 2021.
Move
This
to
is Matt. I'll
approve.
make a motion.
I'll second Matt.
Okay. Who made the motion? Brady?
Matt.
Oh, Matt. Hey, thank you, Matt. And Lacey made the second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
It looks like Kevin has called in. I don't know if he's connected yet, but
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll pinch hit it for you, Kevin, to do the adoption of the minutes. So
You did a great job.
you did do a good job. Okay, moving on to item number 4, public participation. This is the time
How
set
do I
aside.
leave?
This is the time set aside for members of the public to directly address the Technical Advisory Committee on any item of interest for the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Joint Technical Advisory Committee. You have up to 5 minutes. You can have your general concerns addressed now. If you have a specific issue on an item on the agenda, you can speak now or speak about that when the item comes up on the agenda. So with that, do we have any public participation?
Yes, Michael. This is Milt Treeweiler, Turlock citizen.
Go ahead.
And I have a few short comments I'd like to make. This morning, I picked up an 88-year-old friend, and he's been in a retirement center all through the COVID experience. It's the first time he's been able to get back to his house. He lived there for the last 86 years. And when he got to the house, he views it in an unreal situation. The front porch is sagging 2 or 3 inches. The back porch is in the same condition. This house is in shambles. The roof needs to be completely replaced. But in his eyes, this house is still something of value. And we ourselves can't grasp the reality of how much our planet has degraded in my lifetime and even in your lifetimes. Peter Glick, the renowned the world over as a leading expert, innovator, and communicator on water and climate issues, recently said, things we did in the 20th century are not going to solve the problems in the 21st century. We are absolutely in a severe drought. As of April, we have had 1/3 of the normal rainfall year and 1/3 of the normal snowfall year, and almost all the snowfall has melted. He says we can't call this the new normal. It is the new abnormal in some ways. This is not normal. And I say, I hope we can grasp the reality of what's going on here in our Central Valley and understand that this is not normal. This is abnormal. And there are so many things that we have to do, especially with this, our groundwater sustainability agency. We've got to get this as correct as we can, as good as we can, and we've got to grasp the reality that this is going to go on for many, many, many more years. So that's my comment. I just hope that we can all grasp that reality, open our minds, and see what's really happening around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Milt. Any other comments from the public?
I'll just note, Michael, it looks like this comment that I received via email will probably be best covered during the water quality MTs and MOs and undesirable results discussion later. But I just want to flag it for Phyllis and myself so we can find a way to put it in. We have a emailed comment from Amanda Monaco of Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. She wasn't able to make the meeting, but she has some thoughts to be for the discussion. So I'll hold those until that time and I'll bring it up later.
Sounds good, Herb. Do you see any other hands raised? I don't. I flipped through.
I do not.
Okay. So with that, we'll close public participation and move on to item number 5, which is the budget. So Michael Clipper, Treasurer of the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, will present an overview of current and future expenditures for the West Turlock GSA and probably Basin account too. So with that, over to you, Michael.
Hello, everyone. For the April 30th, our ending balance for the West Turlock Subbasin account was $165,113.32. For the basin account, it was $902,145.74. The West Turlock budget was adopted earlier this month. I will send out invoices for all members here in about a month or so. And if anyone has any questions, let me know.
And Michael, I know you're going to send those invoices out too, but most of the agencies are on a state fiscal year, which ends June 30th. So I don't know if some, if they get the invoice before June 30th, but they can pay some this fiscal year and next fiscal year for them or something like that. Maybe if they're interested in that, maybe they can reach out and contact you.
Yes, that'd be great. I'm under the assumption for all agencies that it has to be after July 1st for the invoice and for payment. If anyone wants anything prior to that, let me know and I can do that for sure. If they have any leftover funds that they want to, or even sending out an invoice, you have $3,000 left in your budget this year, I can invoice that and then the balance after July 1. So we are flexible.
Sounds good. Thank you, Michael. Cool. With that, the East Turlock GSA overview of their budget. Are you, Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Michael. East Turlock Subbasin GSA board, JPA board met this morning, went through expenditures so far this year, and we're running over budget, but we have some in reserve fund that we can cover the budget overages with, but looks like Karen's pretty confident we'll make it through the year without any budget amendments or extra billings needed. So that's in pretty good shape. And then we spent a lot of time today talking about the budget for 21-22 and got some good information from the JPA board members. And we expect to bring a budget back to them on June 8th for finalization prior to their adoption for next year. So that's all I had to report from this morning's meeting, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Any questions for Kevin? Okay, hearing none, moving on to item number 6, undesirable results and minimum thresholds for water quality. So the goal of this item is to establish minimum thresholds and undesirable results for water quality that will then be included in the groundwater sustainability plan. So I hand over to Phyllis Stanham with Todd Groundwater. Phyllis.
Looks like you're getting it up there, Phyllis. If you are speaking, just to let you know you're muted.
Okay, thank you for your patience, and I think we are ready to begin here. Let me get this going. Okay, I'm assuming everyone can see my screen, and we're going today covering 3 agenda items, number 6, 7, and 8 for our technical presentation today. I'm going to start us off with the undesirable results for water quality sustainability indicator. We're going to have a discussion and an action item on that. And then we're going to swap items 7 and 8 because we want to get the most important things first in the event that others have to leave later in the meeting. So we're going to deal with the projects and the management actions as the second technical item, and then finally look at the approach for monitoring and measurable objectives as the third. So I'm going to kick us off here with the again, the undesirable results and the minimum threshold issues related to the water quality sustainability indicator. Some of this is review. We've gone through this in previous presentations, but I'm just going to quickly get us up to speed so that we can all be on the same platform when we begin to consider our undesirable results. So just as a reminder, the GSP regulations define this sustainability indicator, which is degraded water quality, which includes the migration of contaminant plumes as water quality that impairs water supplies and could lead to undesirable results. The regulations further suggest that the minimum thresholds be based on water supply wells that are in the subbasin, as well as water quality standards that might be applicable to the subbasin. These would for drinking water in particular, focus on the maximum contaminant level, or the MCL. In addition, we have a basin plan that has various water quality objectives for groundwater in our subbasin. So those would be considered also. In addition, the guidance suggests that we also look at best management practices, the cover of which for the sustainable management criteria that DWR has written is shown there on this slide. And then there's other important guidance that we've reviewed previously that I'm going to quickly review as well. And then finally, we're going to quickly look at the consideration of the approach that was taken in the adjacent subbasins. So let's go first to the guidance document. This is the Stanford Water in the West document by Moran and Beelan, 2019. We've been through a lot more details than I've summarized here, but really these are the most important takeaway points that I'd like to make with respect to thinking about how we define our water quality sustainability management criteria. So the guidance document points out something that we already know, that the State Water Resources Control Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Boards are really the principal state agencies responsible for groundwater quality. The GSAs are not required under SGMA to take on any of this responsibility that's being regulated by others. So we don't want duplication of efforts here. We want to make sure that we're coordinated and collaborating, but not duplicating what's already being done. Further, SGMA tells us that the GSAs are not responsible for fixing any undesirable results that might be in the subbasin now with respect to water quality that were present before January 1st, 2015. In other words, SGMA says we can't reinvent the past, but what we want to do is look at what's happening going forward. We certainly don't want to exacerbate any problems or make any water quality issues much worse. The guidance document provides some specific recommendations, many of them, 2 of which are to confer with other local agencies that are focused on the water quality to make sure that we understand what's being addressed in our subbasin. And then also to assess potential water quality impacts from GSA agencies, avoiding and mitigating undesirable results from GSP projects or management actions. The approach that's been taken in our adjacent subbasins is summarized here, one from the Delta Mendota Northern and Central GSP on the left and the Merced Subbasin GSP on the right. The undesirable results, portions of it at least, are exerted and reproduced here. For the Delta Mendota, they simply say that their undesirable result is significant and unreasonable degradation of groundwater quality that has an impact on beneficial uses of groundwater, either through inter or intra-basin activities. For the Merced Subbasin, they too recognize that they are focusing their efforts on constituents that are exacerbated or ameliorated due to groundwater management activities. So both of these GSPs take into consideration the guidance, which is to take responsibility for any actions that the GSAs might have with respect to water quality. For the Delta Mendota, their constituents of concern were TDS, nitrate, and boron. For the Merced Subbasin, they focused primarily on TDS. And then the sort of framework that we've talked about before with respect to how minimum thresholds are defined and when they are exceeded, that's in the details of the minimum threshold setting and the monitoring sites that each of those subbasins have, and those are included on this slide just for your future reference. But essentially it talks about how undesirable results will be seen with respect to the minimum thresholds. in the field. In our subbasin, most of our municipal and urban water suppliers are actually member agencies of the GSA. So they're already very much engaged in this process, and many of them are on the phone today and participate actively throughout this GSP process. These water supply wells are shown on the subbasin just for information. You can see from the dots that are shown on the map, as well as the little pink areas representing non-city public water systems, that most of the water suppliers are actually in the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. Of course, these are all regulated by the State Water Resources Control Board regulations through the Division of Drinking Water. The minimum thresholds for several of our other sustainability indicators, two of which are chronic lowering of water levels and interconnected surface water, already protect us from making our groundwater levels worse in the subbasin. And as a result of that, we'd like to consider incorporating the minimum thresholds that have already been adopted for the other sustainability indicators into this sustainability indicator as well. This provides a nice consistency for the monitoring network, and it also provides us with protection for making any depth-related constituent worse. And part of the reason for doing that is because in this subbasin, it's been a little bit difficult determining which of the constituents of concern have a clear indication with respect to changing concentrations with depth. And I'll just summarize that briefly on this table. This summarizes 10 of the potential constituents of concern that have been analyzed in your basin setting document and in your GSP. And just some details here about the analysis that's been done and the regulatory framework. Nitrate in particular, we've seen exceedances in our principal aquifers, mostly in the West Turlock Subbasin GSA. This is being now regulated by the Nitrate Control Program through the Central Valley Water Board and managed by the Valley Water Collaborative. They were nice enough to come to us and begin the coordination process. You might recall that late last year, they actually came to one of our TAC meetings and provided a detailed assessment of what they're doing with respect to the nitrate control program. The Turlock Subbasin is a priority in that process. For total dissolved solids, we have some regulatory power through CV salts, the Salt and Nutrient Management Plan, which is a requirement for the entire Central Valley, has been put into place, and the Division of Drinking Water also looks at total dissolved solid concentrations. For our subbasin, this is not a particular significant constituent of concern. We have relatively low concentrations throughout almost all of our subbasin and principal aquifers. With respect to arsenic, we do have elevated concentrations above the MCL of 10 micrograms per liter, primarily, again, throughout the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, where we actually have most of our water quality data. We all recognize that arsenic is a naturally occurring constituent and highly variable in its concentrations, both spatially and with depth. But one of the things that we've noticed in this subbasin is there really is no direct correlation with depth locally. The city of Turlock has done, for example, a detailed assessment of that and has determined that some of their deep wells have the lowest concentrations, and there are various aquifers that appear to possibly be associated with arsenic, but it really isn't something that we see. Like, for example, in some basins, we see that there's actually a level whereby when we screen wells deeper than that level, we actually increase concentration. So we don't really see that direct correlation with depth here locally. Nonetheless, we have considered this in our MT and undesirable results definition. For manganese, sulfate, and boron, we have sporadic local exceedances, very few exceedances, and no real trends that we've noticed regarding the secondary MCL or the notification limits of these constituents. And I think that these are more local well issues than they are subbasin wide or aquifer specific constituents of concern. We do have uranium exceedances of the MCL throughout the Western Subbasin, again, mostly in wells without construction data, so it's difficult to know if it's correlated to depth. This, of course, is continued to be regulated by the Department of the Division of Drinking Water. And again, it is possibly correlated with depth, but nothing that we can really manage that we've been able to determine. The city of Modesto and others have done some detailed work related to this and found that these sort of depth related constituents are not that obvious in our subbasin. We have 1, 2, 3 TCP exceedances throughout the subbasin. This is also being regulated by the Division of Drinking Water. These are non-point sources from surface application primarily, and this is something that we're going to, of course, continue to pay attention to. With regards to sort of industrial or environmentally related site cleanup activities, we do have a plume of tetrachloroethylene, PCE. It appears to be emanating from a dry cleaner area in the city of Turlock. And that's being regulated along with the other cleanup sites by the Central Valley Water Board. This is something that the water suppliers locally are very much aware of, and the city of Turlock has ongoing remedial actions themselves. They look at depth that they pump and pumping cycles. They also are looking at wellhead treatment. And as a result of that, this is already being managed locally. There's also on-site remediation going on by the discharger. And then finally, we did look at DBCP. There are a few local occurrences above the MCL, but it's sporadic. There isn't an increasing trend over time, and there's certainly no widespread issues associated with it. So of those 10 constituents of concern, they're being regulated now, and none of them appear to have a clear depth-related component to it. The water quality strategy, however, is going to look at and consider the issue of potential depth-related constituents, and I'll talk about how we're going to do that in a minute. We are incorporating these existing monitoring programs that are shown on the subbasin map here into our GSP with respect to the analysis and ongoing tracking. The GSAs have made a commitment to confer with responsible agencies as needed, again, many of which are already member agencies of the GSAs. And then the GSAs are in place to look at that information and be able to monitor potential adverse impacts. And in particular, not just from management of water levels, but in particular associated with GSP projects and management actions as appropriate. So we're incorporating that concept into our undesirable result as well. So with that quick overview of information that we've talked about previously, we come to this rather wordy and busy slide, but an important one. And this is something that I have gone through in detail with the ad hoc committee. They have provided their comments and guidance, and we have expanded some of this based on their comments and considerations. And as a result of that, we, I think, have ended up with something that's quite comprehensive, but it does not include additional local water quality monitoring by the GSA, except for their own projects and management actions. So let's go through this just briefly. The very top line just simply gives a definition of undesirable results. And for this subbasin, the ad hoc committee has recommended that we look at undesirable results that would occur if GSA projects or management actions cause significant and unreasonable adverse impacts to groundwater quality that affect beneficial uses and result in increased costs of operations to well owners. So we're really trying to make a rather generic concept be real. In other words, are we going to see increased cost as a result of shutting wells down, having wellhead treatment, and other issues associated with water quality? And so the information that's provided below, it's provided in sort of 4 little segments there. And the first segment simply addresses the issue of the undesirable result and minimum thresholds. and states that MTs are set to avoid increased operation costs by well owners if GSA projects or management actions result in increased concentrations of groundwater constituents that either, the first bullet, cause a new exceedance of a drinking water quality standard, an MCL, in a potable water supply well, or significantly reduce crop production from an agricultural water supply well. So those two are the issues and the conditions that would be undesirable results to us, and those are the conditions that we are trying to avoid. The MTs for chronic lowering of water levels in the subbasin have already been agreed to be set at the 2015 low water levels. So we've already recognized that declining water levels and overdraft conditions in the subbasin can be mitigated if we commit to a significant number of projects and management actions that allow us to maintain 2015 low water levels throughout the basin. And these, being protective of future water level declines, are also protective of any water quality issue that could be exacerbated with declining water levels, because we're simply going to arrest the water levels at 2015 levels. So we feel like that because of that protection of the chronic lowering of water level MTs, we'd like to see these adopted as a proxy for any potential depth-related water quality impacts. We, again, as I mentioned when I went through our 10 identified potential constituents of concern, we don't have clear indications that these are depth-related, but we recognize that the MTs that we have set at 2015 levels provide a bit of a blanket protection throughout the subbasin. And as a result of that, we feel that it's an appropriate proxy for the, protecting against water quality impacts that we see in our related to depth-related constituents. The GSAs and member agencies obviously are continuing to confer and coordinate, and we're going to write that into our undesirable result definition here. To continue to confer and coordinate with regulators and regulated entities on drinking water and agricultural water quality. And then we wanted to further speak to that conference and coordination with the public drinking water suppliers, and we do that in those next couple of sentences there. We recognize that we are going to be conferring with them about any potential water level change and any potential water quality change that the public water suppliers may have an issue with. And at that point, we will be in a good opportunity to be able to work directly with the public water suppliers to determine whether or not those water quality exceedances might be related to anything that the GSAs are doing, in particular GSA projects or management actions, and whether or not those exceedances might lead to undesirable results. So, sort of in the absence of undesirable results and in the absence of recognizing the specific GSA projects and management actions that we have to date, we feel like that this provides a comprehensive framework that again covers GSA activities that may have any potential adverse impact to water quality. And then finally, just stating the information that we've been talking about as GSA projects and management actions are implemented, activities that could affect water quality will be identified. Project-specific minimum thresholds will be selected at that time as appropriate. So we are committing to looking at and being considerate of whether or not adverse impacts of water quality might be associated with any of our projects and management actions as they're being implemented. Certainly, we are going to ensure that the projects and management actions comply with regulatory requirements. And also, we will consider the appropriate MCLs and water quality objectives at that time based on the constituents that are identified as the potential impacts from those projects. And all of this, again, putting together to avoid undesirable results. So that's a bit of a long-winded slide to get through, but I thought it was important that we all have the opportunity to consider this sort of comprehensive and blanket nature that we're trying to put forth to make sure that the GSAs are protecting the subbasin against any of their actions, whether they be management or maintenance of water levels for depth-related water quality constituents, or if they be anything associated with a GSA project or a GSA management action. So at that, I will be glad to answer any questions that anybody might have on this. And I also would like the TAC to consider this for moving forward in the GSP, so that we can, again, feel comfortable that we have TAC support and approval of our sustainable management criteria. So any questions first?
Questions for Phyllis? Any wordsmithing? Any further clarification needed?
Michael, it looks like Amanda from DWR may have raised her hand. She may have a comment. Go ahead, Amanda, if you're on the line still.
Okay, thank you, Herb. So Phyllis, I realized I don't think I was in the discussion when you guys first rolled out this sustainability indicator. So I want to know why there is a focus of depth as it relates to groundwater quality within this proposal.
Because in addition to our projects and management actions, I think that I certainly feel this way, and I think that the TAC members have all agreed that if there are depth-related constituents and we allow water levels to decline in certain areas, then we are sort of indirectly allowing a water quality issue to be exacerbated. And we have looked hard and long at our constituents of concern to see if we feel like that they are depth related. And there is, just not that clear cut depth relationship that we have seen for some of these constituents and other subbasins. So those were the things that we've been looking at with respect to that issue. Again, just trying to keep any GSA action from impacting water quality inadvertently by allowing certain water levels to decline in certain areas. Does that answer your question, Amanda?
I think so. The regulations don't kind of say anything about depth related water quality. The regulations really focus on the degradation of water quality, including the migration of contaminant plumes that could lead to undesirable results. So the undesirable result definition, I think, is very clear. And given that the background you've provided on the water quality constituents and contaminants that are already existing, and your mention of a plume that you guys are aware of already. When you use a proxy, I think, is that what we're proposing to use the proxy to set the minimum threshold? And I'm just concerned because there has to be a very clear and very defined connection between groundwater depth and water quality. And you kind of just spoke to the challenges of making that clear connection between groundwater depth and these constituents of concern. So I just want to mention that it doesn't quite fit the regulations, and that's all I can tell you guys. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that very much. So that we are recommending a proxy because, in particular, we have seen some of these naturally occurring constituents in particular be depth related in some areas. And it's difficult here to say that declining water levels would or would not result in water quality impacts, but we wanted to at least state for the record that if there are those impacts that are out there with respect to uranium in particular, arsenic in particular, some of the reducing chemicals that we've seen increase in some subbasins with declining water levels, that we're protecting against that. And so really, I guess what we're thinking about is, how could the GSAs degrade water quality? What are the ways that we want to identify and avoid for future undesirable results? Certainly, you have pointed out that GSA projects and management actions are direct actions that we are proposing for the first time in the subbasin. And as a result of that, we'll want to make sure that there are no impacts with respect to water quality and that could be related or associated back to those projects and management actions. But it does occur to us as well that in the absence of water levels declining further, it's difficult to determine whether or not there would be degraded water quality associated with that. And because we don't know, we're trying to think about, okay, what has to happen with respect to us knowing a little bit more about that, because we're not planning to decline water levels. And so we go back to the opportunity that the regulations provide with proxies, that if we can demonstrate that one sustainable management criteria for one of the indicators is protective against the other, then we're allowed to use that as a proxy. And for that depth-related water quality impact, again, that we haven't seen undesirable results, but we have acknowledged that there may be future undesirable results with respect to depth-related constituents. We thought that it was most protective to say and to state as part of this sustainable management criteria that we're also incorporating that here, just as the added protection. So that was the two-pronged approach that I think the TAC and the ad hoc committee was going for here. How does that sound? Is that the kind of thing that that you feel like that the regulations allow?
Hey, Phyllis, this is Walt.
Yes. Hi, Walt.
I was also thinking that using the water level as a proxy began to get to the issues of gradients and vectors. For example, if there was a plume from a landfill or a plume from a leaking storage tank or whatever, we would not be taking actions or operating projects that would change those gradients and vectors of movement. And so by using a water depth as a proxy, I thought that was sort of a way of backing into that degradation question. And does that sound anywhere close to what you might be thinking too?
Yes, it does. I didn't feel the need to expand on that in this definition, only because we feel like that we have seen the contaminant plumes already being generally controlled and remediated.
Yeah, I knew, and it was, but I was picking up on what Amanda was saying, and maybe there needs to be some language added that makes that linkage more apparent.
Right. I think that's fine. The one thing that I will say, I don't know, Amanda, I know that you were participating in many of the discussions that we had very early on. This was more than a year ago now, I think, where we had evaluated the seawater intrusion sustainability indicator. And one of the things that was brought up as we were talking about whether or not that was an applicable indicator for our subbasin is that we all recognized that there is elevated total dissolved solids concentrations with depth. We know that our subbasin is underlain by marine sediments, and there are some geological faulting and other complications associated with the lower portions of our subbasin that we don't have a lot of information on. And as a result of that, we said, that isn't seawater intrusion, but we do recognize that we could potentially see degraded water quality associated with that deeper saline water. And as a result of that, we certainly would want to have some controls on water levels in the subbasin. So perhaps bringing in that TDS linkage at depth is something that would be important to us here with respect to being more consistent with the regulations that you're speaking about with respect to, what depth related water quality impact are we actually protecting against? Does that seem to help the issue, Amanda? If you're still on the
The linkage is definitely important when you're kind of taking this approach. When I read the last portion where it sounds like you're setting up kind of a plan for a trigger, right, for future projects and management actions that the GSAs are going to be implementing. I'm curious as to what Amanda Monaco actually provided for a comment, Herb, so we'll see what she has to say. But I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the comments that came in for the critically overdrafted basins under this indicator. And so it's just interesting that there's other, how can I say this, other GSPs that have a similar kind of thought, but they actually took the approach to ensure that they're paying attention to the contaminant levels. So while you are collaborating, and of course we don't want duplicate efforts with these other agencies, you may also want to consider making it very clear how the GSAs are going to be receiving the information from the other entities, not just that you're just going to let someone else handle it without having the GSA boards understanding the trends of water quality in their groundwater as they're proposing projects and management actions.
Right. So, so it sounds like that you're suggesting that there be a little bit more teeth related to that that sort of third, the conference and coordination step.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. It's so funny because they are us is a little bit of how I think that the ad hoc committee felt about it. Because all of the member agencies are also responsible to and reporting to the Division of Drinking Water. It seemed that I don't know, a little bit of unnecessary administration to say that we're going to coordinate with ourselves. Do you know what I mean?
I think what's important to maybe mention is the Department of Water Resources is not a water quality agency, and the staff reading these groundwater sustainability plans are not familiar with those programs and may not also be the interested parties reading your GSP or those that are following the groundwater sustainability plan. Your public members, your landowners may also not be familiar. So I wouldn't assume that the readers of your groundwater sustainability plan are going to understand that.
Right.
That's kind of what I was trying to kind of lay out.
Thank you. I think you're just saying, for goodness sakes, Phyllis, you may assume it, but please be clear.
And Phyllis, this is Valerie. This has been kind of an interesting discussion, and maybe we're talking about two sides of, I don't know, one coin, but different sides of it. And I guess what I mean by that is I'm hearing DWR talk about when you use a proxy, you need to affirmatively say why the proxy is protective of the sustainability indicator you're measuring. And I think instead of saying that it is protective, we are saying that we think if we bring levels down, it could not be protective. And so I think we're saying a negative when we should be saying an affirmative. And I don't know if we can get to the affirmative, but I think what I'd like this to say is we're using 2015 levels, which are elevation levels, as a proxy because we know that we will see that those will be protective of moving plumes or degradation. And we know that because at the 2015 levels, we know that that won't ever induce, it won't be the reason or an inducing of a movement of a plume. And we know degradation won't happen because of X, Y, or Z. So instead of saying what we don't know, I think we need to say we know that these 2015 levels will be protective for the degradation component and the plume movement component. I think that would maybe read more towards meeting the regs standard for using a proxy.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Valerie. Let's think about what that might be. So the first sentence of the second phrase there says, the MTs for chronic lowering of water levels set at 2015 low water levels are protective against future water level declines that could exacerbate water quality and are adopted as a proxy for potential depth-related water quality impacts.
But why depth-related? Is there any way we can say, from a technical perspective, and I don't know the answer to this, so it's a question, that the 2015 water levels are protective against future water level declines that could degrade water quality and are adopted as a proxy for any movement of, for any either degradation or plume moving water quality impacts? I guess that's how I just heard DWR's concerns. The metric isn't depth related water quality impacts. The issue is degradation and plume moving.
Okay, so if we took out the phrase potential depth related and just simply replace that with degraded water quality impacts, does that fix it?
And well, two things, not only degradation, but plume moving. And I think it does fix it. Of course, the more difficult question is, do we have the technical data to actually back that up? Can we actually say we think it's protective for other, more in the chapter when we describe it? Here's why we think it's protective. It's not going to move anything. And at the existing levels, there will be no further degradation because why?
Yes, absolutely. We can say that. And
Great.
the discussion that we're having here, again, I'm going back to this two-pronged approach. One is managing water levels in the basin is the potential for, we need to evaluate whether or not the way that we're planning to manage water levels in this basin will be protective of groundwater quality. That's sort of one component. And the second is whether or not the projects and management actions. So it's something a little bit different than managing water levels, right? That's the fact that we're managing water levels ourselves. We have to ask ourselves, we are managing them at 2015 levels for chronic lowering of water levels, but we would also be managing them at 2015 low water levels for the protection of groundwater quality. For the protection of groundwater quality, except for projects and management actions that might have additional adverse impacts. And so that was the sort of two-prong approach where this is about the declining of water levels. And then the last little piece of it is about the projects and management actions. So,
right. Yeah, and I know this, sorry, this is Val again. I know what you're saying, and I know that the whole concept about the project is you don't want to put a project in that recharges or moves a plume. And I think that's smart. I saw a lot of people do that in the 2020 plans. And it sounds like we have the technical data. Maybe we're just not demonstrating the affirmative use of the proxy well enough in our language. But I think some of the changes, assuming we have the technical data to back it up, I think DWR, if we're using a proxy, and obviously DWR can correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I'm hearing And what I've seen before is they want you to say, here's why it's protective. Here's why we don't need to use a different metric, is because we know that our elevations is protective of degradation and plume moving. If we can say that and back it up, I think that gets us to the reg standard.
I absolutely think we can do that. I think that I thought we were doing that a little bit here, but let's do this on the fly. If I can get this to, let's see. So
let's maybe while you work on that, take the pressure off you. I know Herb, you said at the beginning of the meeting and also in the chat, do you have email comments from Amanda Monaco?
Yeah, I'll read them real quick. I have them on my desktop, and I'll provide them to Phyllis and the team for their consideration as well. She said, in the meantime, she talked about some other issues, and if this was going to be the end of the conversation, and obviously with us still working on the GSP sections and them not being finalized until they're finalized, that I will reply in kind and let her know the conversation will ensue. But here are her 4 recommendations. And again, this is Amanda Monaco. She's policy advocate, I believe, with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. And she's been in some of our meetings in the past. Number 1, well, she said, I would strongly encourage GSAs to do the following. Number 1, set MTs for water quality that would prevent increases in concentration of all primary and secondary drinking water contaminants due to groundwater management activities from contaminant concentration resulting from overpumping, movement of contaminant plumes due to pumping activities, or contamination from recharge activities, and more. 2, ensure that GSA's monitoring network has monitoring wells in/near all disadvantaged communities and areas on domestic wells, which are monitoring for these drinking water contaminants. 3, ensure that robust monitoring is done around recharge projects, particularly on-farm recharge or recharge on land that has been previously in production, to measure any potential impacts to nearby drinking water. And 4, as part of the GSA's project and management actions, establish a drinking water mitigation program. This might be for the later item, so that if increased groundwater contamination occurs from the types of groundwater management activities listed above, the GSA can help connect impacted homes with entities who can ensure they receive clean and reliable drinking water. And then she provides a link to a report that that I believe her agency and Self-Help and others created called Framework for a Drinking Water Mitigation Program. And she asked if these comments can be included in the discussion, and I let her know that we would read them over. So those are her 4 recommendations, and I'll make sure and provide those in print as well.
That sounds great. Let me go through them very briefly. So the first one she talks about is tying these back to MCLs, and we absolutely have done that. The very first sentence says the MTs are set to avoid increased operational costs by well owners, and anytime it causes a new exceedance of a drinking water quality standard, an MCL, and a potable water supply. So thank you very much. We absolutely have considered MCLs in that. With respect to monitoring networks within the disadvantaged communities, we absolutely have representative monitoring wells. We've talked about some of that in the past, and we will continue to see maps on the monitoring network going forward. So we will defer that for a moment, but we will also just want to assure for the record that we are monitoring in the disadvantaged communities. With respect to monitoring around our projects and management actions, that's exactly what we were getting at with the last phrase that's there shown on this slide, that we are going to be very specific with respect to each of our projects and management actions as to which constituents of concern might be impacted, and to consider appropriate MCLs and water quality objectives to avoid undesirable results. So I feel like that we are generally adhering to and taking into consideration many of the concepts that Amanda is providing us with her comments, and we appreciate the opportunity to hear her comments and incorporate them too. So, so I will look into the mitigation link that she has provided us. I don't have that today, but anyway, so that's where we are on that. Do we have any other questions or discussions? So given the comments by Amanda, thank you very much, and the further guidance by Valerie, I just changed our one sentence there with regard to using the MTs for chronic lowering of water levels as a proxy to include the plume movement and other water quality impacts. I guess at this point, I think that seems to comply with the comments that I've heard. Any other comments on that?
I agree, Phyllis. This is Kevin. And to move this along, is there somebody on the east side that wants to make a motion to accept what they're seeing on the screen?
Yeah, this Walt, I'll make that motion for approval.
Thank you, Walt. Anybody want a second, please?
Lacey, I'll second.
Okay, Lacey, thank you very much. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, and I'll leave it for
The west side.
Thank you, Karen. That's
I apologize for the background noise. Do we have another motion to move the recommended undesirable results and minimum thresholds for water quality to be included into the draft groundwater sustainability plan? Leandro? Anybody on the west, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, Karen. I'll make that motion as well.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Debbie.
Okay, with that, we can move forward. Everybody who approves signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. So we're on to number 7 then, right, Kevin? Okay, so the approach for the monitoring network. This is again for Phyllis.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot at this point and ask our subconsultant with Woodard and Curran, Ali Tagavi, to talk about the projects and management actions next. I know that some of the folks on the call, the TAC members, might have other things, and we are a little behind the schedule here. So let's get the most important things done first. So if I can turn it over to Ali.
Good afternoon, folks, and I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you folks see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for spending a few minutes with me this afternoon on sharing with you folks some of the thoughts, ideas, and information that have been shared with us over the course of the past several months on the projects and management actions. This is a majority of this presentation is going to be informational for informational purposes and for some interaction at this stage. And so we'll take it on here. So the goal is to review the potential projects and management actions that are potentially going to be included as part of the GSP. We're going to be talking about supplemental projects with additional details later on, and potentially over time, the next couple, 3 weeks, look into the details of each one of these projects and management actions and add and remove them and complete the process before we dive into the analysis. The Sigma regulations for projects and management actions state that each plan shall include a description of the projects and management actions the agency has determined will achieve the sustainability goal for the basin, including projects and management actions to respond to changing conditions in the basin. So it's really important that we come up with these, what's called the projects and management actions, and I will go through what that necessarily mean in just a slide or two, but that those are the actions that we need to take to bring the basin into sustainability. The regulations also state that a list of the projects and management actions proposed in the plan with a description of the measurable objective that is expected to benefit from the project or management action. So that's critical, that we need to be looking at what the measurable objectives are, minimum thresholds, and how the projects and management actions would necessarily be addressing the measurable objective and how it would be affecting the sustainable management criteria. The list shall include projects and management actions that may be utilized to meet interim milestones, the exceedance of minimum thresholds, or where undesirable results have occurred or are imminent. So that's what we're going to be looking into. And just like Phyllis said in her previous presentation that she just had on the water quality, we're going to be looking at the undesirable results on the basis of the sustainability indicators, groundwater levels, storage, water quality, and interconnected surface water bodies, and look at the projects and management actions in that context. These are proposals on my behalf to you folks as to how we should potentially categorize and classify projects and management actions as we start looking at each one of these. My thoughts are, and this is based on plenty of other GSPs that have already been submitted in the past as part of the critically overdrafted basins to the state, as well as the ongoing efforts on the GSPs in other subbasins, which is to group the projects and management actions into three categories. The first one is ongoing management actions, and those are projects that are already in place. They have been in place in order to meet the, not necessarily meeting the regulatory requirement, but they end up actually supporting the sustainability of the basin. And that could be as management actions such as conservation measures, improvement of irrigation efficiencies, and so on, that are already in place or are going to be in place imminently, or other projects that have already been started as part of the individual GSA activities or irrigation district activities. Group B would be planned projects and management actions, and those are readily implementable projects with minimum or no additional infrastructure. And so that could be a project that has already gone either through environmental permitting, CEQA, or funding acquisition, and or maybe the designs are already ready and they're ready, basically shovel ready, so to speak, to be put in place. Or these projects are ready to be developed with relatively secure funding sources and well advanced in permitting process as well. So that's the group B. And then the group C would be kind of future projects that are mostly at this stage at concept level. They may be have to be detailed out over the course of time. And so we need to include those as part of our list, try to quantify the sort of the features of those projects, but we may not necessarily be able to analyze them at the same level of detail as far as the impacts and the benefits as group B, which is the imminent projects that are ready, shovel ready, so to speak. The type of information that we would need for each one of the projects are, of course, basic information such as who is the sponsor, the project location, geologic conditions, soil conditions, water supply, and so on. But more so also the size of the project and what the operational criteria for the project are going to be. So that's, you know, not only the size, but the source of water, whether that's river water, whether that's runoff, whether that is imported water or recycled water, schedule of the water availability, and schedule of the operation, such as an example, in the case of a recharge project or an ASR project, aquifer storage or recovery project, you know, we want to be looking at what is the schedule for the recharge cycle versus extraction cycle, and those kind of details in terms of the operation. And of course, estimated start date. So to that end, I have a couple of examples. I took the liberty of looking at the project for the surface water supply project, the regional surface water supply project, that is put forward by Turlock Irrigation District and the Stanislaus Regional Water Authority. And that project particularly is to bring in surface water from Tuolumne River and provide treated surface water for municipal use to cities of Turlock and Ceres. And so for a project like this, we would need at the minimum the type of information that's on this page here. I'm just providing you an example of what level of detail of an information we would need for projects which are under Group B, and we're going to be analyzing those in a lot more detail. So we would need to know what's the project type. In this case here is municipal water supply in lieu of groundwater. The two cities are currently on groundwater. We would need to know what the source of water is. We would need to know what the size of this project is, the water supply schedule. So that we would need to know, you know, what years the cities are going to be getting this water. Is this going to be firm? Is it going to change during wet years versus the dry years, and so on and so forth? And if there is variability in terms of the water supply, then we would need to know what's the backup plan in terms of the cities staying on the groundwater, as an example, during dry years or not, or are they going to be getting firm water and completely get off groundwater, or what percentage of time and what years or what months they're going to stay on groundwater. So in that case, then we also need to know where the surface water delivery is going to take place and which part of the city are going to be getting surface water, which part of the cities are going to stay on groundwater if they do. And if they do, then what sort of wells and which one of the wells are going to stay, or are there going to be additional wells that are going to be drilled in order to maintain the groundwater supply as a backup plan for the cities. We would also need to know the monthly schedule of the water delivery, of course. And then at the high level, we would need to know what sort of facilities are going to be in place in order to make this project work. And then potential location of the river diversion for this one here, because the source is Tuolumne River. Is it still going to be at LaGrange, or is it going from Turlock Lake, or are there going to be other diversion facilities in order to make this work? I don't know that at this point, but we would need to have that information. And then of course the start date. On the flip side, going to the east side, I pulled this one, which I saw probably one of the more advanced projects that we received information on from the East Side Water District. ePure had put together a draft memo, or maybe it's a final memo, I forgot one or the other, but it provides some level of information in terms of what this project is about. And so I consider that also to be under Group B, which is something that we need to evaluate. And so in this case here, the project is to convey floodwater that is retained in the Mustang Creek detention basins for dry wells to be implemented as a managed aquifer recharge. And so in this case here, of course, we'd like to know what the source of water is. I'm told that it's Mustang Creek and the Tuolumne River. We would need to know what's the size of the project, how much water is the project going to be relying on to basically recharge at these dry wells, the location and the footprint of the project, schedule of the water availability. So we would need to know some sort of a time series of what years and what months there would potentially be, or some level of criteria as far as what the Mustang Creek flows are, and what part of that flow is going to be shaved off to be used in this project as a recharge project, and how much of that water would be available for the project. What are the recharge conditions? What depth these dry wells are going to be at? And then are there any evaporative or other losses that are associated with the project? And then what sort of facilities also, again, are involved in this project for implementation? And of course, the start date. So these are kind of the minimum type of information that we would need to be able to document this project in not only in a very succinct manner for the purposes of the GSP, but also be able to evaluate these with additional analysis, both engineering analysis as well as hydrologic and modeling analysis, to look at the effectiveness of these projects to bring the basin into sustainable conditions. So to that end, we have a list currently of about 13 projects that includes the two that I just gave you as an example of these projects that have already been discussed. This list is by no means exhaustive and by no means complete. There may be lots of issues and holes in them, and there may be other projects that you folks may have in mind that we would need to add to the list. And so to that end, the purpose of today's conversation is basically to introduce to you folks this list here that we have received and documented so far. A majority of these projects, I do not have at this point the detailed level of information that I just requested on these two example problems on the west side and the east side. So our team is going to be contacting the project sponsors to the extent that we're aware of. And if not, I'd be contacting the west side and the east side reps directly to start collecting the level of information that's needed for us to be able to take the projects further forward, and also identify whether or not these projects collectively in collaboration with the sponsors, identify whether or not these projects are going to be within group A, B, or C. And like I said, the group A and the group B are going to be the categories of the projects that we would take forward for additional investigation, additional evaluation of the effectiveness and of these projects in meeting the sustainability goals, as well as whether that's through engineering analysis, hydrologic analysis, and modeling analysis, to make sure that we can meet the needs of the basin sustainability. Any questions so far?
Ali, this is Kevin. If nobody else has a question, this is a great start. Thank you for this. Will this also feed the EIR process? That was my question.
I'm going to defer. I would think yes, my short question, my short response, but I would defer perhaps to, I believe Debbie can shed more light on this.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, Kevin. Yes, so as we are starting to embark upon the projects and management actions, we are bringing the consultant team in to begin that work and to kind of understand the projects that are being proposed so that they can incorporate it into the PEIR. So the answer to that is yes. The reality is that some of these projects may not be fully fleshed out. They'll benefit from the PEIR because that can be used to trigger, and to use some of that information as we move into CEQA for those projects further on down the road. But there may be some projects that might benefit more if they have a lot of details that could be incorporated into the PEIR. And so that's what we have to weigh. Yeah. But yes, that is the intent.
Thank you, Debbie. And just for information, like number one here, the ASR wells, the Ag ASR wells, I mean, if that becomes a reality, you know, we've got 20 of those projects. It's not just one project, there's 20 locations. So just a heads up, and we'll give you more information on that.
That would be wonderful. And those are the conversations that I'd like to have, Kevin. And would I be reaching out to you maybe initially on pursuing these conversations, Kevin, for the east side?
Yeah, yes, please, for now. Yeah, until we get a sponsor for each one of those.
That would be great. And the more, the more we can get information on these, the more we could take these further. And of course, it's going to help the EIR process as well.
Sure. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So Ali, I did have a question. So for the group A projects, those are existing projects. Aren't those kind of already incorporated into the analysis for the baseline because it's existing? Or are you kind of envisioning those could be modified in some way to provide additional benefits? What are your thoughts with respect to what that group A really is?
Very good question, Debbie. And the reason I came up with that group A is based again on experience on some of these other GSPs, and it's definitely relevant to our GSP as well here. And that is, I'll give you an example. And those may potentially be mostly management actions. Like I suggested, you know, additional conservation measures or rationing measures. Both on the ag side and the urban side, we've relied on either current or the 2015 urban water management plan in order to for setting up the baseline conditions and the assumptions in the baseline for water demand and conservation measures and so on. So as an example, I know the 2020 urban plans are requiring, based on the state mandate, there's going to be additional conservation measures that need to be put in place for the urban folks. The ag folks are coming up with their ag water management plans, or maybe you already have that in place. And so if there are actions that you have in plan, but have not necessarily been incorporated into the baseline conditions, those are the ones that we would like to catch and incorporate as part of these PMAs, especially as part of the management action, because though, you know, we started talking about the baseline like about a year ago, 9 months ago, and we've been sort of working along all of that, but there may have been additional actions that you folks have already worked on, which may not have been captured as part of that process. We would like to capture that and incorporate that as part of your next actions. Does that make sense?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So with that, and given the time for the meeting today, I'm going to just let you know that I prepared, and you have this as part of the slide deck, a very, very high level synopsis of every one of these projects, that every one of the 13 projects that were on that list there on slide 8. I've prepared a very, very high level synopsis of what this project is about for informational purposes at this stage. But really, there's not much of a meat on these bones at this stage yet, at least to the extent that we're aware of. So that's when I'd like to reach out to you folks to talk about each one of these projects with the project proponents and sponsors and get additional information. So the slides are there for your information, for your benefit to basically just browse through, but really doesn't add much of a benefit. And I would like to come back to the next meeting with a whole lot more information on each project, especially on on Group B projects, and hopefully with some results of how we're going to go about addressing the analysis of these projects for the purposes of the GSP. So with that, I know Phyllis has got a lot of other topics to cover in terms of the monitoring network. So Phyllis, do you feel like this is sufficient enough, or should we go to more detail on any one of these?
No, I absolutely think it's good. This was the purpose, you guys, and I think the TAC members were aware. Certainly, the ad hoc committee supported bringing this to the TAC before we had a lot of details in there. We even have some projects that are super conceptual at this point, and so we just wanted to get the conversation started. We wanted to get in front of you early. If there are TAC members that are seeing this list and going, "Oh, this triggers an idea of something that we're planning or even thinking of doing that could be potentially incorporated into this," then now would be the time to let us know so that we can build a little bit more comprehensive list. So thanks, Ali. I'm sorry, Debbie.
Sorry. So what, and maybe I missed it. What is the timeline for what you're planning on doing with respect to this, and who do they contact?
Yeah, so Ali, do you want to go through a little bit of a timeline? I mean, we're taking this sort of one step at a time.
That's right. So that's a very good question, Debbie. I was planning to reach out to Kevin and to reach out to yourself initially in terms of sort of going over the respective projects for the West Side and the East Side, or East Side and West Side, because I said Kevin and you, so respectively there. And then take it from there as far as what level of detail we need to dive into each one of these projects, categorize them, and get the details that we need. Based on that, then I can set the timeline on when and how we're going to go about analyzing these. Overall, I would say the month of June is the month of PMA for us. That's pretty much, I would say that's the goal for me, to try to address all of these towards the end of June, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. So everyone, if you have projects that you don't see on the list that you'd like to include, reach out to Ali. If you don't have his contact information, reach out to me and I can give it to you. But the sooner we know about it, the better off we'll be.
Thank you, Debbie, for bringing that up. You just reminded me, this is Kevin again, of something that came up this morning in the JPA meeting. And Ali, that was along the lines of what Merced Basin did as far as citing the OPTI list of projects for their IRWMP. And Stanislaus County has a similar list in their IRWMP.
Okay.
Somehow being able to cite all those projects.
So cite them and then also probably prioritize them in these groupings here as well. Is that what you're thinking?
That's what I'm suggesting. I don't know how easy or complicated.
I can definitely pull those projects into the list.
Okay.
And then when I get back in touch with you folks, we could probably spend some time together on the relevant projects that you feel they should stay in. Because some of them, they may not be necessarily relevant to the GSP. They may be just IRM related ones. So I can do the first level of filtering and then share that with you folks and take it from there. Definitely. That's a very good suggestion. We'll do that.
Thank you.
So if there's nothing more on this topic, I really appreciate the time, and I will look for me calling you folks or setting up some time to talk to you folks. Thank you. Back to you.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Ali. I appreciate that very much. And so we're going to transition back to me one more time, you guys, because we're going to just cover a lot in this meeting, as we've been trying to do in almost every meeting. Appreciate everybody hanging in there with us. So that takes care of items 6 and 7. And now we are going to move on to a new item. I'm sorry, 6 and 8. And we're going to move on to a new item, number 7, which is we were talking about approach for monitoring network because we wanted to start getting some of the details of how the representative monitoring networks and the sustainability management criteria are going to work together. And so in doing that, we are for the first time talking about measurable objectives. This is something we've been focused very much on MTs, minimum thresholds. And so measurable objectives are additional sustainable management criteria that we want to evaluate. Before I even start this, I want to just say that the ad hoc committee is going to dive into this in a little more detail. So everything that we're going to look at today, which is just going to be a few slides, is really just for information. But because we hadn't really talked about measurable objectives yet, I wanted to get this in front of you today if possible. So let's just dive right into what a measurable objective actually is. There's a definition that I have paraphrased a bit here. They're specific and quantifiable goals for the maintenance or improvement of specified groundwater conditions that have been included in an adopted plan to achieve the sustainability goal for the basin. So what does that really mean? So in the same way that we've been selecting specific and quantifiable thresholds, those minimum thresholds, in many cases, they are actual water levels that we have identified, then these, for when we have water levels for our minimum thresholds, we will also have water levels for our measurable objectives. And what we're trying to do here is to say, here is where we would like to see the groundwater basin operated. It might be maintaining water levels, which is generally what this subbasin is moving forward with, or in some cases, there may be some improvement of the specified groundwater condition, such as what we've talked about along the Merced River. So just going into some of the summary here that I have pulled both from the regulations as well as the best management practices. Measurable objectives are quantifiable goals for your desired groundwater conditions. That's a sort of simple way of just saying it. And they provide a margin of operational flexibility above your minimum threshold. And so I thought I might show just this example hydrograph to illustrate what those things are trying to refer to. So in this particular example hydrograph, we have an orange line, a minimum threshold that has been selected. And for the purposes of argument here, it is the low water levels that we see toward the end of that hydrograph. You can see that that orange line sort of goes over the low points of the blue line, which are water levels in a well. There's also a green line on this, and that's the new measurable objective. And for this particular example, I've set that at a midpoint between the high water level. You can see on this blue graph that comes within the first 8 years or so of this hydrograph. The midpoint between that high water level and the MT. So this green line sort of sits in the middle of the fluctuations in water levels in this particular representative monitoring well. You don't have to do this in every well. It's just an example, but I think it is a good one because this tells us where we would like to operate our groundwater basin, essentially between the highs and the lows that we see over time, recognizing that in droughts, we're going to see water level declines, and in wet periods, we'll see water level rises. But overall, we're looking to sort of operate in this sort of mid-range process with respect to our desired conditions within the basin. I've also included this last bullet from the regulations just as an indicator here. The regulations tell us that if an undesirable result occurred prior to January 1st, 2015, then the measurable objectives really must be set to either maintain or improve those conditions. You don't have to go back in time to improve those conditions if that's not appropriate for your subbasin, but you do have to at least not make it worse. So in many ways, those are the guidelines that we've been moving through with respect to setting our sustainable management criteria. And so, yes.
Can I interrupt on that last bullet?
Please.
I'm just wondering how that would, because we're focusing a lot on hydrographs and setting minimum thresholds at 2015 or 14 levels, how that relates to setting those minimum thresholds. And I'm having a hard time with the undesirable result equating to that minimum threshold. I guess you see where I'm going there?
Well, so if you want to maintain your current water levels and arrest your declines, then that's that setting the minimum threshold will keep you from doing that. So the minimum threshold is looked at as the floor, so to speak, and the measurable objective is set for where you need to generally operate to maintain it. So, you know, we're going to see fluctuations in our water levels. Water levels will continue to go up and down in response to hydrologic conditions. And so you aren't setting the minimum threshold because you're expecting your water levels to always be the minimum threshold. And so what is it that you're using to kind of help you know where you're generally going to be operating your basin? And that's where the measurable objective comes in. The measurable objective, unlike the minimum threshold, is not necessarily a compliance point. You're required to identify it, you're required to quantify it, but you are not required to operate at it or below it or above it with respect to compliance in your GSP. In other words, your plan cannot be judged inadequate if you are not, quote unquote, achieving your minimum thresholds over time. It is the minimum threshold. I'm sorry, measurable objectives. It is the minimum threshold that is the compliance point, so to speak. But your measurable objective just gives you an understanding. I look at it sort of as a buffer. You know, if it's average hydrologic conditions and you're operating way below your measurable objective, then you're probably operating a little too close to the minimum threshold. That's the kind of thing that the kind of way that you might think about or use the measurable objective. There's a variety of ways to sort of look at it, but it gives you sort of an opportunity to gauge how things are going over time, even if you are, you know, whether you're in a drought condition or you're in a wet condition, with respect to sort of how you're operating the basin with respect to the minimum threshold. So it is just one more little sort of helpful operational guideline.
Yeah, no, I have no problem with all the help we can get.
I think going down the.
Okay.
I thought somebody.
I'm sorry.
They just wasn't.
Yeah.
This is Valerie. I don't know what the background is, and I don't know if this helps, but an undesirable result is usually defined as how often you can violate a minimum threshold. So.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is.
You look at all the magenta dots.
Whoever's not muted, can you mute, please?
Yeah, there's someone talking.
Up from the road at multiple locations, you have potential multiple. This is always
that helps clarify it, Valerie.
Yeah, I don't, Herb, I don't know if you can see who's talking and manually mute them, but.
I'm looking. I don't know if by chance, Phyllis, hopefully, do you have a coworker? I'm looking to see if there's any mics moving other than yours and Valerie's, but I'm not seeing, but I think we might have resolved that.
And it would,
yeah.
But anyhow, let's move on. I'll work through it. I just think that some of the minimum thresholds are directly tied to undesirable results. Others are not. That's my confusion.
Right, and your undesirable result definition might be something like, you know, we've gone through this a little bit before, but that would be undesirable results happen when you've got 8 minimum threshold violations in a 2-year period that are not drought.
Right.
So that's how you define it. You are supposed to define it based on your MTs.
Right.
But you're right, it's really hard to do that.
Okay. All right, sorry. Thanks for taking the time though.
Okay, sorry, I was handling my issues here. Okay, so I heard part of that. I missed part of it as well, but it sounds like that, Kevin, you were just thinking in terms of whether or not a minimum threshold is set to maintain water levels to avoid an undesirable result. And the answer to that is yes, that's what we've been trying to do. The measurable objective helps you sort of maintain operation above the minimum threshold, if that makes sense.
No, I'm up to speed. Thank you.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you. Okay, so with respect to how these look on a map and how these look on hydrographs, just want to back up. So I've just selected 4. We've done this before. We've selected just some example hydrographs within the subbasin and put on those hydrographs minimum thresholds. And so I've just added a possible approach for measurable objectives to some of these, and we see a midpoint as well. So you can see on this first one, we've got a well in the western West Turlock Subbasin GSA that has relatively low fluctuations over time. We've set a minimum threshold again at a 2015 water level, so that's where that orangish red line is. And then measurable objective simply looks at the high water level and the minimum threshold and assigns that as a midpoint. So the simplistic view of the measurable objective for this is a measurable objective of 47 feet in mean sea level. And it gives you what's termed as an operational flexibility, operating above a minimum threshold to avoid undesirable results. And in this case, it's only 11 feet. These wells in the west that don't fluctuate very much, the operational flexibility is really quite narrow, a little bit of a narrow band compared to some of the other areas where there's a little bit more fluctuation in the well. But it, again, giving you a sort of understanding of where you want to be over average hydrologic conditions. And then moving to an additional well in the Western Turlock Subbasin, this time in the southeastern portion. Again, not very much fluctuation in that well, and a minimum threshold that was set for 2015 water levels at 79 feet MSL, with a high water level of 98 feet MSL, a midpoint would be 88. Again, not very much operational flexibility there, about 9 feet. But it's because the water levels really historically haven't fluctuated very much at this location at all. With respect to the northeastern portion of the West Turlock Subbasin GSA, where there has been much more fluctuation. This is a little bit of an incomplete hydrograph, but enough information to put the information together. We've got a minimum threshold, again, maintaining water levels at the 2015 low levels with a high water level of about 75 feet MSL, and then a midpoint of 56. So assigning, again, for the purposes of this discussion, a midpoint measurable objective. So that gives you an operational flexibility above the minimum threshold of about 20 feet. And then the final example is a little more complex because in this particular well, this is a CASGEM well, but it is an active production well. And as a result of that, we do see pumping water levels that complicate the picture of the water level declines in the wells a little bit. And because the purpose of maintaining water levels is not to sort of maintain pumping water levels within a pumping well, but water levels within the aquifer, we've sort of backed it off to the water levels that are more indicative of non-pumping conditions. And in this particular case, minimum threshold of about 18 feet MSL based on 2015 low water levels that were not associated with pumping. And then an historic high water level of about 68 feet MSL, midpoint there being of 43 feet MSL, and an operational flexibility of 25 feet. Are there any questions on the assignments of measurable objectives and how they're being thought of, at least in these examples?
Yeah, Phyllis, this is Rhett Calkins.
Yes, Rhett.
So I note that it looks like as a practical matter, we'll hit the minimum thresholds within a year if our measurable objectives are set where you're showing them, because we go into a drought and we're going to need to pump. So that leaves us 1 year of pumping if we look at the last set of results. So it seems like our measurable objective is set too low. We need storage so that we can pump for multi-year drought when our surface water disappears. Am I looking at this right, or what am I missing?
No, I think you are. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do, of course, is to set a measurable objective that is indicative of multiple, hydrologic conditions. Our minimum threshold gives us the floor of how to avoid undesirable result. And I think the flexibility that you're looking for, Rhett, is, how do we manage these water levels when we go into a drought, even if we set a measurable objective even a little bit higher. And the answer to that is going to be controlled by the details that we put toward the monitoring network. Some of these things we're putting together now, we're going to be bringing back in front of everyone. We're just trying to kind of do this in a stepwise fashion. But the details will allow for water levels to decline during droughts, as long as there's a mechanism in place to allow those water levels to recover. And so one of the things that's been happening in the past is that, as we hit a new drought of record, we've sort of basically not recovered out of that drought. We just continue to go down and down. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with respect to the projects and the management actions is gives us an opportunity to maintain these floors that we see, recognizing that we might exceed them during times that we do need to pump. So the measurable objective being higher doesn't change where we've defined undesirable results. We're going to be doing that over the next few weeks with respect to sort of how we talk about the framework, the number of wells that might decline, how much they are allowed to decline, and what they have to recover to. Does that make a little more sense?
Well, I think I think I'm understanding that we need to pump during droughts.
Yes.
We need to augment that surface water in the basin. And if we only leave the measurable objective high enough, if that's where we want to be, then we really don't have the ability to pump. I mean, we got the ability to pump for 1 year and then we're done. We hit the minimum thresholds and we go below the minimum thresholds, and then we have undesirable results. So it seems to me we're setting ourselves up to go into undesirable results. We need more storage down there in this gigantic reservoir that we can pump before we hit undesirable results. And so I think we need to move a measurable objective up.
Yeah, so moving the measurable objective up would sort of help us in terms of trying to achieve it. But we still have the problem that we still need room to pump, during times of drought. And the water levels are what they are right now, and we're going to have to move as quickly as we can toward projects and management actions. And we're going to recognize that we're probably going to exceed the minimum thresholds in the short term while we're getting everything together. So one of the things that is going to be incorporated into the rest of the sustainable management criteria is, how many wells and at what levels can we exceed the minimum threshold? And as long as we recover from that, what conditions are going to be acceptable going forward? So setting the measurable objective higher would sort of assume that there were going to be higher water levels during wetter times than we've seen historically. And that may not be the case. Yes.
Sorry, this is Val. I'm listening to this and I think maybe I'm not right, but Rhett, tell me if this is how you're looking at this chart, that if you moved the MOs up, you'd have more room in the MTs. And that's not necessary. You could have this green line and this red line be vastly far apart. So they're not necessarily dependent on each other. The measurable objective is kind of your goal of where you'd like to get. The minimum threshold is supposed to operate kind of as like an operational floor. So you could, if you're just looking at this from like a layperson's perspective, you could draw the minimum, if you thought it was sustainable, you could draw that minimum threshold level way down without moving the measurable objective. So they're not necessarily related in the sense that if you move one, the other one will need to move. And part of the problem, and I think Brett's kind of observations here have touched on it, it really gets to the tension of we are an agency that's going to be regulating ourselves. So do you want to regulate yourself into violations immediately? Do you want to regulate yourself into compliance, but really not sustainability? And that's a tension that everyone kind of has to deal with in Sigma. And of course, then to make this all even more complicated, you've got the role of projects and management actions. And maybe you have a third chart here that says, this is how it would go. But if you put projects and management actions in, for example, if you had like a recharge project, maybe those blue lines wouldn't go down as far. They'd be hovering maybe more around the MT level. So the concept here, you can look at this 1,000 different ways. But one of the concepts is, this well, if you just looked at this well is going to need to do a project or management action to stay in compliance. You could also move that MT way lower, but then the question becomes, is that sustainability? If you're letting the MT go way too low, or are we just kind of plummeting into an unsustainable practice or operation? So anyway, I don't know if that helped. That I sort of was picking up on maybe that was the issue, but hopefully.
Well, here's the issue. So I have a well. I have access to TID surface water. My well is useful in drought years. I don't run it unless I need to. So it has a value, and its value is standby. So if we're going to run the basin at the minimum threshold, close to the minimum threshold, and I'm fine until we run out of surface water, and then I go to turn my pump on, and you say, no, we're at the minimum threshold, Rhett. You can't turn your pump on. Well, that ag well that I put in at great expense during the last drought because surface water wasn't available is worthless. I can't run it.
Right, and I think it's not, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think Sigma here's what Sigma would like to do in that scenario. They would love to let you exercise that well in drought years and then get off of it. But what they're telling you is, and I'm not saying this is true for your specific scenario. I'm thinking of a hypothetical, so I don't want to get all your neighbors mad at me. But I think what they'd say is you've got a problem with people pumping all around you if that's the scenario. If you have to come online and you just bring yours on, you just bring on groundwater pumping in only really extreme dry years, you should be able to do that. And we should set MTs that allow you to do that. But of course, if everyone around you is pumping the basin into lower and lower and lower levels, then that's not really what's happening. And I think DWR and Sigma would say you have to get those folks to stop doing that to allow you to be able to use your well in those dry years. So, we have to come up with sustainability, and maybe it's that we need to, create projects or recharge or in regular years, limitations. So when you come on in a drought year, you are able to exercise it in that way.
I appreciate that explanation. I think I know I'm not just speaking for myself. I know how many wells went in during the last drought, and I'm in the same situation as a lot of people out here. We're going to use surface water. But when it goes dry, we put some very expensive ag wells in because we had to.
Yeah, and this water, you have every legal right to use that water too. and sigma and the GSA and the GSP is not intended in any way to interfere with your legal rights. I think what's confusing here, Phyllis, is the pumping water level, the deepest water level you're ever going to see is that which occurs in your wellbore. That's not what we're setting the MT on. The wellbore drawdown in a production well is always going to be pulled down the furthest, depending on where your bowls are set and your pump. What we're trying to manage is a water surface of an aquifer over a very large area over time. We're not trying to measure and manage to points on that surface where individual wells are located.
No, if you're speaking to me, Walt, I understand that.
Okay.
I understand.
I was not only speaking to you, I was speaking to the whole group.
Sure.
In the sense that, don't get caught up in trying to measure, the points on the surface that penetrate through the bottom of the MT. That's going to happen. What we're trying to manage is that static surface over a very broad area. And
sure,
if we set up the monitoring network correctly and we use our statistics and our kriging and, how we, so many occurrences occurring back to back during non-drought years, we know that during droughts, people are going to go to the wells for backup. That's why conjunctive use is what it is. That if it's, a wise use of both your surface water and your groundwater, and you rely on the groundwater during the dry periods and you let it sit idle and do nothing during the wet periods. That makes perfect sense.
Right. The issue, I guess, is on the grander scale. There's those users, especially on the east side. There's even users within the irrigated area of TID that will solely pump because that's how they're set up. Now, they're pumping during years they could have got surface water. Unless you're on the east side, you can't get it. So they're keeping our reservoir, our measured objective low. We're not recharging. There's a net deficit. And so when the other users like myself need to pump, well, now we've set the minimum thresholds so that we can't. That's making my investment significantly, it's devaluing my investment. I won't be able to pump during drought years. That's why I have it. And it's not just me, it's everybody out here.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, Red, I think I finally, I've gotten to where I perhaps can help say something about your question as I was continuing to listen to you explain the situation. I think what you're trying to tell us is that with respect to the measurable objective, your view of seeing this is that the higher water levels during wet time periods need to be high. That was the storage that I think you were mentioning. Do I now understand what you were asking a little bit better?
Yeah, maybe I'm not understanding what you're telling me, but we're getting closer, I think.
I think I now know exactly what you're saying. So I think what you were doing, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You're looking at this, and I popped back to this one example because this is the water levels closest to my understanding of where you are in the basin. And so I think, what you're observing is you're saying, okay, thank you very much, Phyllis. We've got a floor, but unless the water levels are higher during wet time periods, unless they're higher during wet time periods, we're not going to be able to keep that floor during dry time periods because we don't have, quote unquote, that storage in the ground. That's I think what your point was. Does that make sense with what you're
exactly? That's exactly what I'm saying.
I'm so
I see
sorry.
1 year. I see 1 year of storage, and then we're done.
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Walt.
I think the issue is the MO and the terminology that it implies. You know, the term objective almost sounds like something that we're trying to drive to, and it's of course measurable, but it's not really an objective. It's almost arbitrary. It's saying that there is a floor that we don't want to exceed multiple times too often in too wide of an area. So that's, you know, setting this idea of the MT. But we know that we want to operate the system where we can, where we have the tools and the resources, and where we have issues of concern at a higher level. And that higher level is this thing we're calling measurable objective. But it's not really a stop sign. It's not really a regulatory limit. It's not anything. It's just saying we know that we need to operate at a higher level within the aquifer system if we're going to be able to, most of the time, stay away from hitting the floor. So the MO, it's less than what we think it is. It's not a hard line.
It isn't a hard line. You're right, Walt, and that was well said. It's a guidance, and I think that I think Rhett's question really was less about the MO and more about where is the storage going to come from. Because if we just say, okay, we can stay above the minimum threshold during wet times, congratulations to us, but that's not really going to get it. Because once we get into the dry times, we're going to absolutely have to fall through that floor if we've been there during the wet times as well. So I think this concept of the high water levels have to be higher is exactly right, regardless of how that relates back to the MO or not as guidance. And that's what we're going to try to achieve, Rhett, with the projects and management actions. The recharge projects are absolutely going to be part of that, making water levels higher during wet time periods. That's the goal. And you're absolutely right. It's something that we're going to have to achieve. We're going to have to see water level highs that are higher in order to maintain the floor. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And there's a practical limit to that as well. I mean, saying it is one thing, making it happen is another. I think we're going to have to be very prudent and practical about how we achieve it and where and at what cost and other potential impacts. You know, water well recovery is not recharge. So if we don't have enough of these recharge projects scattered across the basin, I mean, over time, continued pumping and drawdown and recovery, drawdown and recovery, drawdown and recovery, drawdown and recovery, you know, you're not ever going to get back to where you were.
Well, the reality is 20 years ago, the water level in my specific underneath my property was 40 foot higher. So something's changed over the last 20 years in pumping.
There hasn't been recharge.
Well, talk to TID about conjunctive use. I'm in TID territory, and I listen up to, you know, conjunctive use, conjunctive use, conjunctive use. Well, they pump a large amount of the water that augments surface water right here in my area, and they have multiple reasons for that. And part of it's, you know, operating the canals efficiently. They need to add more water in this area.
Yeah.
And they have very productive wells here that are deep. It's good, clean water. And we're higher on the irrigation system. So it's all a great thing. But what it does is it moves water down quite a bit.
Yeah, it comes at a cost to the resource, and maybe that's something we need to look closer at.
I've been trying to get TID to look closer at it for at least 13 years since my domestic well went dry. Anyway, it's
that's
that's why we're here. That's why we're all here is all the wells that went dry.
That's exactly right. And one of the things that we're trying to do, and you know, I remain optimistic, at least in the short term, because we're pushing forward as best we can to establish the floor. And that's the first part of it. And we may not be able to achieve it in the first year, the second year, but if we push for the floor, I think that we can get there. It's going to take a little bit of time to, you know, turn the ship around. So it's just the reality of what we're facing. But I still believe that we have the opportunity to mitigate some of the overdraft that has been, you know, bringing the basin to its current circumstance over time.
Okay, Phyllis, Walt, Valerie, and everybody else, thank you for the time. That's a good discussion. Appreciate it.
And Phyllis, and not to dig too deep here, but I've been intrigued by this for a long time. Some of it is just better managing of the well field and the scheduling and the rotational aspects of how you would operate a well field, and not just turn, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
I do know what you mean, and I can tell you this.
There are tools that would allow us to look at, you know, what would be the best wells to turn on, at what time to run for how long, and then let those relax, turn on a different set. You know, you're still achieving the same thing with your efficiency and your flexibility and your conjunctive use, but it's just not everything on, everything off, you know. I think there are better ways to do that.
I don't disagree with that. I will say this. There have been a lot of management actions that happened during the drought of record, Walt, a tremendous amount, and we still weren't quite able to achieve what we needed to achieve. So we're going to need these projects and management actions in a big way, and we're going to need to try to set this floor and achieve it. Otherwise, we're going to just keep digging a hole for ourselves, and it's going to be harder and harder to get out.
Yeah.
So this is Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
I just wanted to make a comment. You know, Rhett kind of touched on it, and I guess it's in how you define the undesirable results, but the minimum threshold is set at a level where, like he said, in 2 years of drought, most of the wells on the east side are going to be below that minimum threshold, and without projects and a lot of recharge, that's not going to recover. And so what you're doing is setting yourself up to be in regulatory non-compliance in 2 years. And so that's been my concern from the beginning, that the minimum thresholds are set too high, if you will. But you know, we've crossed that bridge. But you know, if there's a way to define the undesirable results to allow that going below that MT for a number of years, maybe they can live with it. Otherwise, you'd have to tell the east side to shut their pumps off for 10 years.
Understood, and there is absolutely a way to do that, and the way that we're going to do that here, we've talked about it quite a bit in the ad hoc committee, and we're getting the details together to bring that forward, Dennis. But Sigma allows interim milestones, and interim milestones says there's no way that you can on day one be sustainable. That just isn't going to happen. And especially given the sort of conditions that have exacerbated the water levels in the basin over time. And so Sigma allows for, as you know, 20 years of implementation. And in those first few years, before we get projects online, before we get management actions, and management actions may include some of the things that Walt's talking about with redistribution of pumping, for example. But as we're getting those things together, Sigma allows for interim milestones. And those interim milestones will allow for your measurable objective to actually be below the minimum threshold. In other words, they recognize that water levels will continue to decline and while we're putting this together. And so, you know, once we get the plan in place and we start doing it on day one, water levels are going to continue to go down. And if it doesn't rain, it's going to be even worse, right? We've had so many years of ongoing drought. So the concept of interim milestones will keep you out of non-compliance in the first portion of your implementation period while you're getting things going, while you're getting things set up to achieve the levels that will avoid undesirable results for the subbasin. So there's already something in process, in place to allow for that. And we're going to be talking about that. We've talked about that several times before. I don't know if you remember that, but interim milestones is the way to sort of move into this sustainability in a gradual level. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yes, that's helpful. Or yeah, helpful.
Okay, that's it for me. We've gone over, I'm sorry.
Can I just jump on one thing? Rhett and Walt kind of talked about TID's pumping program, and Rhett was a TID employee, and Walt's never worked for TID. The pumping program is a lot more precise and well managed than we seem to portray here. So I just want you to know that. And children's right here is most of the pumping is done in the southern and western side of the district boundary, none in the northern and eastern area where we know there are shallow wells. Now, we don't control private pumpers, what they do for their own irrigation purposes, but the TID's groundwater pumping program is managed to ensure that northeastern area is not pumped at all during dry years. So I just want you to understand that. So we'll follow Rhett on the 40 feet decline in his area. I'm having a hard time believing that is TID's pumping program. And as you mentioned, it's higher up in the system, we have less need for volume because obviously the canals carry a higher volume at that point in the distribution system. So I just want to clarify that in a public meeting.
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate that clarification. I just, you know the history out here because I told it to you that in 2007, my new house, I try to move in, I can't because my domestic well is suddenly empty, and TID would not turn off the pump. They just commissioned, after 20 years of inactivity, they commissioned a pump and they rented it. And anyway, TID wouldn't even look at it, and I was an employee of TID. And anyway, that just is in my history. So that there's when I hear about how well TID and irrigation districts manage water, and I hear about conjunctive use, I just have that as my history. So it's important for me to understand where we're going. Yeah, I just have this. I haven't got over that issue of moving into a new house and I can't move in. I can't even get a permanent financing on it because there's no water, but and no help from TID. Just bizarre.
I got it. Thank you. Thanks for that, Rhett.
Everything's on the table, all of the above. We need to look at everything that we can do.
So are we ready to move on to number 9, Sigma related updates?
Sure. You know, in the interest of time, I don't have a real update this time, as we've been kind of going through things on a regular basis. The only thing I would say is that we did distribute an initial draft of one of the next sections to the TAC members for their internal review. And we are asking for comments on a very short timeline. So if you did not receive it, please let us know and we will get it to you. But again, that it is an internal draft that will be, comments will be worked through at the TAC level and then sent back to the technical consultant team to make revisions, and then it will be made available to the GSAs, and the GSAs will release it to the public. So it's that same process that we've been going through with the other section. But please get those comments back because we are on a very short timeline. And I'll answer any questions if someone has one. Yeah.
And I'll just add from my perspective real quick, on the public outreach side, there is no update that can't be withheld until the next meeting. We're still awaiting FSS word on the funding we requested from the department or applied for from the Department of Water Resources. And I know that they're working on that because I've heard some side discussions with me with the consultant, double checking some of our ask. But other than that, and what Debbie reported regarding comments, nothing new to report on public outreach.
Debbie, this is Walt. I saw that I had received it's the water budget section, right?
Yes.
Remind us all when you want comments due. I
asked for comments in 1 week. You received it yesterday.
June 4th then, or?
So I asked for comments on actually the 2nd, because you like I said, you received it yesterday. So that's the week.
Okay.
It's a short section. It's only 44 pages.
All right.
So it's doable, I think.
Yeah, I'll get right on it.
Then each of the GSAs TACs will confer, and if there are any differences of opinion, we have another week to address that. And then the ad hoc will work through the comments from each of the 2 GSAs, TACs, sorry, not GSAs. So that's the process, and there's a week for that.
Yeah,
so it's not we got to keep it moving.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any discussion for the schedule, Debbie?
No, not at this point. We're still working through some logistics. People will start seeing some information as it comes out. We did send information back to the technical team on the comments on the first 3 sections. So they are going to get back to us on the timeline for making those revisions, and then we can schedule the joint GSA meeting. So you'll be hearing more about that shortly. And again, that is when they would receive those first 3 chapters, have a review of them, and have the opportunity to release it to the public. So we're moving in that direction. Stay tuned.
Okay, that sounds good. If nobody has anything else, that moves us on to number 10 for the next meeting. It's a special meeting scheduled for Thursday, June 13th, 2021. Is there anything else that anybody has that they would like to discuss here on the west or the east? Hearing none, I would like to adjourn the meeting. Is there any motions?
I'll move.
Okay, Debbie, is there a second?
Second, Walt.
Walt. All in agreements to adjourn the meeting, please agree by saying aye.
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 Bye.
Okay, hearing none. East side?
This is Dennis. I move to adjourn.
Second. think Kevin left.
Kevin did.
Well, I know you opened in the beginning, but we have the motion in a second. So for all those in favor, please say aye.
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 For all those opposed? Hearing none, adjourned at 4:19.
Thank you, everybody.